To understand the Brothers Karamazov, you have to understand the chaos of the Karamazov family. It is a household defined by a kind of feverish, restless energy. A family that seems unable to live moderately in anything. At the center of this storm is the father, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. He is a man of profound, almost grotesque sensuality, a person who has lived entirely for his own impulses and has no concept of moral restraint. He is a man of senselessness, as Dostoyevsky describes him, and his predatory, careless way of living sets the stage for the destruction of everything around him. The story follows his three sons, each representing a different way of navigating a world that feels increasingly fragmented. There is Dmitri, the eldest. He is a man of intense, volatile passion. He lives entirely in the moment, driven by his blood and his impulses. He is capable of great cruelty, but also a desperate, almost frantic desire for something higher. Then there is Ivan, the middle brother. He is the intellectual, a brilliant and cold nihilist who struggles with the terrifying possibility that if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. He is haunted by the logic of his own mind. Finally, there is Alyosha, the youngest. He is the moral center of the book, a young man seeking spiritual refuge in a monastery under the guidance of the compassionate elder Zosima. The tension in the family reaches a boiling point over two things, money and women. Dmitri is locked in a bitter, public feud with his father over a disputed inheritance. But the real battleground is Grushenka, a beautiful and shrewd woman who has become the object of obsession for both father and son. While Dmitri is driven by a desperate, impulsive love for her, Fyodor uses his wealth and his predatory nature to try and claim her for himself. This creates a web of resentment that pulls everyone in. There is also Katerina Ivanovna, a woman who is caught in the middle. She is a woman of immense pride who has sacrificed her own dignity to support Dmitri in his time of need. But her devotion has become a kind of self-lacerating burden, a way for her to feel morally superior to the man she loves. As these tensions escalate, the family begins to unravel. Dmitri's volatile nature leads to public assaults on his father, and the atmosphere becomes one of impending violence. Then, the breaking point arrives. Fyodor Pavlovich is found murdered. The investigation into the murder is a whirlwind of suspicion and social scandal. All the evidence seems to point directly at Dmitri. He was seen near the scene of the crime. He had a motive in his hatred for his father. He was in desperate need of money, and he was found with blood on his hands and a brass pestle in his possession. To the public and the law, the case seems almost too simple. But the truth is far more complex and far more unsettling. The actual killer is Smerdyakov, the family's illegitimate and cynical servant. Smerdyakov is a man who has lived on the margins, a man who has internalized the darkest implications of Ivan's nihilistic philosophy. He has watched Ivan struggle with the idea that if there is no divine law, then there is no moral law. Smerdyakov takes this intellectual theory and turns it into a lethal, practical reality. He commits the murder not just out of personal gain, but as a grim, logical conclusion to the ideas he has heard discussed at the Karamazov table. Before he can be brought to justice, Smerdyakov commits suicide, leaving a trail of psychological wreckage in his wake. The trial of Dmitri Karamazov becomes a massive public spectacle, a theatre of the soul where the forensic facts are almost secondary to the character of the man on trial. The prosecution doesn't just argue that Dmitri killed his father, they argue that he is a Karamazov through and through. They paint him as a man of uncontrolled, dangerous passion, someone whose very nature makes him capable of such a crime. It is during this trial that the intellectual weight of the novel truly crashes down. Ivan, who has spent the book trying to remain detached and purely logical, undergoes a psychological breakdown. He realizes that his own ideas, his insistence that nothing is sacred if God is absent, have provided the moral permission for the murder. He realizes that by intellectually justifying the crime, he is, in a sense, complicit in it. He collapses on the witness stand, unable to reconcile his cold, rationalist mind with the visceral, bloody reality of the death of his father. Ultimately, the legal system fails to find the true killer, but it succeeds in finding a scapegoat. Despite the lingering doubts about Smerdyakov, the jury delivers a guilty verdict. Dmitri is sentenced to hard labor in Siberia. The man who is morally innocent of the specific act of murder is legally condemned by the weight of his own reputation and the perceived darkness of his soul. As the story moves toward its conclusion, the focus shifts away from the courtroom and toward the spiritual legacy left behind. The novel ends not with the tragedy of the trial, but with a small, quiet moment of hope. Alyosha, the youngest brother, has emerged from the chaos of his family's destruction with a new kind of strength. He has taken the teachings of Elder Zosima to heart, not as abstract theories, but as a way of living. Zosima taught that we are all responsible for one another, and that the only way to combat the darkness of the world is through active love, a love that is not just a feeling, but a constant, difficult service to others. And the book concludes at the funeral of a young boy named Ilusha. In a moving benediction, Alyosha speaks to a group of children, urging them to hold on to sacred memories. He suggests that even in a world of suffering and injustice, a single pure memory of goodness can act as a shield against future darkness. It is a quiet, defiant message that even when the law fails and the intellect falters, there is a way to remain human. When we look at the themes Dostoyevsky has woven into this massive work, we see a profound exploration of what it means to be a person in a modernizing world. One of the most central ideas is the Karamazov nature. This is the idea of human duality, the notion that a single human soul is capable of containing both the highest, most sublime spiritual aspirations and the lowest, most depraved impulses. The brothers are not just characters, they are facets of a single human condition. Dmitri is the passion, Ivan is the intellect, and Alyosha is the spirit. They are all fighting for the soul of the same family, and by extension, the soul of humanity. This leads directly into the problem of evil, which is perhaps the most famous philosophical debate in the novel. Through Ivan, Dostoyevsky asks a devastating question: how can a just God exist in a world where innocent children suffer? Ivan cannot accept a divine order that requires the unexpiated suffering of the small and the innocent. He returns his ticket to God, essentially refusing to participate in a world that functions this way. This is the ultimate challenge to faith, not just a question of whether God exists, but whether a moral universe is even possible if such suffering is allowed. Dostoyevsky's response to Ivan's nihilism isn't found in a complex logical argument, but in the character of Zosima and the concept of universal responsibility. Zosima's teaching is radical. He suggests that we are all responsible for everything and everyone. We are not just responsible for our own actions, but we are spiritually accountable for the sins of those around us. This idea bridges the gap between the individual and the collective. If we are all interconnected, then the crime of one is the burden of all. It is a heavy, terrifying way to live, but it is the only way to move past the isolation of the individual ego. We see this tension play out in the contrast between Ivan and Alyosha. Ivan represents the limits of reason. He tries to solve the problem of existence through logic and abstraction, but his logic leads him to madness and a sense of total disconnection. He is a man who has thought himself into a corner. Alyosha, on the other hand, represents a faith that is experiential rather than intellectual. He doesn't try to solve the problem of evil with a syllogism. He tries to answer it with presence, with compassion, and with a commitment to the people standing right in front of him. The character of Smerdyakov is the dark shadow cast by Ivan's intellect. He is the personification of what happens when the everything is lawful doctrine is taken to its logical extreme. If there is no higher law, then the only law is the will of the strongest or the most selfish. Smerdyakov shows us that nihilism isn't just a philosophical stance, it is a social and psychological force that can dismantle the very fabric of human community. In the end, The Brothers Karamazov is a book about the struggle to find meaning in a world that often seems to lack it. It doesn't offer easy answers or comforting platitudes. It acknowledges the reality of the Karamazov darkness, the capacity for cruelty, greed, and madness. But it also insists on the possibility of redemption. Through the trial, the murder, and the madness, Dostoyevsky suggests that, while we may be driven by our passions and haunted by our doubts, we are also capable of a profound, transformative love. The novel leaves us with the idea that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the act of remembering, of holding on to the light of human connection, is our most vital defense.